morning. My name is Zane, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm on the leadership team here at church, so that's sort of one of my areas of involvement here. And it's been a real privilege to be a part of that team, which is sort of set up to give some governance and oversight to the running of the church. And so that's why I'm up here tonight, and tonight, man, that was a long time ago. And so, yeah, and I kind of like sharing as well. So, Father, we thank you that you're already here. Lord, you dwell in each of us that call you Father. You make your home more and more in our heart as we look to you. And so we thank you that your presence is here already. We thank you also that as we meet together in unity as a people, something unique and special happens. So may you do something unique and special here today in our hearts as individuals and in our corporate body as your church. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So, who had a fight this morning with somebody? Any conflict in the home? Yeah, the old nudge. Anyone got a nudge from the side? No? Look across the room. Today's topic is on conflict. And it's interesting because when I was asked to do this, I was in the middle of a situation that had a lot of conflict. And it's not always easy to be in conflict. And in that space, I had to step up and I had to hold my ground on the convictions that I had on character in a situation that I was faced with. And as I did that, I found that God sort of redirected the situation around me to bring a lot of good out of it. Leading into today, my wife and I know you'd look at me and you'd think they would never argue, you know. How would Zane and Michelle argue? We argue. We're real people. We have disagreements. Sometimes we're not that great at how we communicate with one another. And in our home, man, we've had more arguments than normal leading up to today's talk. And you have to ask yourself, why is that, right? It's because we are spiritual people. And our whole life, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, has spiritual implications, right? And there's two powers at work. We believe is God and his perfect plan for our life, and there's the evil one that's coming to try to bring disunity and to bring attacks on us and to divide us and to make us live more out of our own selfishness and brokenness in our relationships that we have with people. And that's what's been happening. Like, I've felt the spiritual attack as I've come into this space to share this morning. And so I stand here as a follower of Jesus, like you are, and I stand on the evil one, and I say, Jesus conquered the grave when he died and was resurrected. Do you agree with that? Yeah, we can stand on the serpent and his ways, and we can proclaim a new way of freedom and spiritual living as we move forward as Christ followers. That wasn't planned, sorry, that was extra. So, I want to start off with this. This is one of the last things that Jesus says before he goes to the cross. It's in the same sort of area where Jesus predicts that Peter is going to deny him. And Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, I give you a new command. This is John chapter 13, 34. I give you a new command. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you, that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Interesting, eh? A lot of repetition. That Jesus is saying that it's so important that you love one another. And when you love one another, the result of that is that people will see that and they will know that we follow Jesus. So as we go into some of these thoughts that I have today around conflict, we need to always remember that the core framework that happens around is loving one another. But at the same time, that's often the framework that we miss in conflict, because it becomes about ourselves, not about the other person. Or is that just me? Probably just me. Okay, I don't have pretty hearts on my slides today. I'm just black and white to the point here. And this is what I want to establish, is that there's conflict in two forms. There's healthy conflict and there's healthy and unhealthy conflict, okay? Now, for the sake of today, what I want to do is say that unhealthy conflict, I'm just calling conflict. I'm calling healthy conflict today communication, because I think that when you have healthy conflict, communication is the healthy process that the disagreements or different viewpoints that they're worked out in the process of communication. Does that make sense? Yeah. So first of all, what I'm going to do is talk about communication in a healthy and unhealthy sense, and then we're going to go into some other thoughts out of that. What I was thinking is that communication is a process of discovery. In the ideal world, if we're communicating well, we are discovering, we are learning about somebody else, about their viewpoint, about something that's important to them, about a new way of doing something. So it's a process of discovery, communication, when it's done in a healthy sense. And conflict, I would say, is often, in the negative sense, right, that I'm referring to as conflict today, is a result of closed opinions. So that's the point where in the communication, maybe the process hasn't gone so well, and then we get to the point where, we put a stake in the ground and we have a closed opinion. That's our opinion, that's our mindset, and that's what we're going to take to the grave. So when we look at the idea of healthy communication, what does the framework look like? Now, I did a job in my daily world about 18 months ago for a client, and they used to give us fruit that we got to enjoy. And one day she gave me a plum, and it was like a plum I'd never had before because of the texture. It was amazing. It was called a Louisa something plum. Maybe we'll just call it Louisa plum. Amazing, yeah. And then at the end of the job, as a gift to me, like any good client would do. No, she gave us a plum tree, the same type to plant in our home, which was really special. And so what I did with the plum tree is I put the stakes in the ground either side of it, and I used some rope and tied water hose around it to guide the tree, right? Because the idea with a tree is that you want to guide it so it grows straight. And you want enough wiggle room, apparently, I've been told, so that it establishes good roots, but not so tight that it doesn't learn to grow on its own. And so that's like a healthy process, right? The stakes and the rope around the tree is like the healthy process to help a tree grow. And I did that. And then about a year down the track, as I look at the tree, I see it's growing, and there's a segment of about this much on the bark of the tree that's got rubbed up and become agitated, because the process of it didn't quite work. And so I did something wrong in that process, and it's given the tree a bit of a hard time. And that's like communication. It's a structure to see growth in our life when we do it well, but sometimes we don't do so well in our communication, and it can lead to conflict. So a healthy example of good communication, the first thing is that it actively listens. Now, I was told this many years ago, there's listening and active listening. When you're actively listening to someone else, you are actually engaging in the discussion that you have with them, right? You're not just stuck there thinking about your next statement that you want to say, or looking for a fault in what's being said to justify your position that you're wanting to make. You're actively listening and you're engaged with that person. Because in healthy communication, we would know that we get an opportunity to speak, the other person gets an opportunity to speak, and everyone gets an opportunity to clear out and say the things that are important to them. Michelle and I do this daily. We are amazing at it. But no, I'll go down the track of some of the other things that I should say me, I'm not going to put her under the bus. So a healthy communication leaves space for questions and curiosity. And this is the key, right? When we are loving one another, the other person's best interest is very crucial to our understanding and communication and in life in general, right? Because we love them. We want the best for them. That is our motive. And what do we say here at Franklin Baptist? We say loving God, loving people. Right? And so out of that space of loving, we are to ask questions, to engage with what somebody is sharing with us, to be curious, to learn more about that person's viewpoint, to learn more about our perspective on something that we could know more about ourselves on. So that's a healthy picture of communication. And the other healthy picture is mutual ground. So when you're communicating with someone, there's always going to be mutual ground that you can stand on together. But I think a lot of the time we forget that.
Yeah.
And when Michelle and I were dating, quite early on, we were, I think, going out to a picnic. And so we went to Pack and Save to buy food for the picnic, like what you would do. These days, she would probably just go and buy the food. But back then, we'd always do that sort of stuff together. And so we were going through and we were picking different types of food and we were in agreement because we were in young love, right? So everything you have is in common. Yeah. And all the foods we were identifying with, yeah, I want that food, I want that food. And then we went down a particular aisle at Pack and Save to get the potato chips. And so obviously with everything in common, I knew, and I reached up, I said, well, obviously it's going to be, which we all know, and you can confirm to me, salt and vinegar. Yeah, come on. Is the ultimate type of chip. And then she says, huh? And no, she wants the chicken. Wow. So, let me explain to you, though, why salt and vinegar is the best. Because what's funny about that? I'm justifying my position on salt and vinegar. So, in my early childhood, we exaggerate through communication too, right? We always do that to make our point. So, my mum, if you're listening, mum, always gave me chicken noodles. Didn't have many other flavours, and we always had chicken chips. Now, neither of those statements are entirely true because I'm exaggerating to make my point so that I can get what I want. But so then I carry that into my older years, and so I've often not liked chicken chips as a result of my past. Right? So think on that. Really interesting how God works, because I had a Dad and Moses date yesterday. And when we walked into the dairy, because he really wanted to buy lollies, because that's what 5-year-olds, it's like the perfect date for them. The dairy owner picked up 2 packets of chips as I walked in and walked off of them, and they were salt and vinegar and chicken. How crazy is God? So the key thing I'm saying here is there is mutual ground, okay? And we need to find mutual ground and celebrate the mutual ground. When we were early in our dating career, there were some differences in theological understandings from the church background that she came from. And I remember when we were dating, I thought, I think these are too big. Like, I don't agree with a couple of these things. And I don't know if the relationship can continue. Like, it was, for me, they were such big issues that everything almost got called off, right? If that had happened, I would have missed all the beauty in the relationship that we have learned and the mutual ground that we have shared, which was the bigger picture of our theological identity and beliefs, and not married her and not had children and not be where I was today. Because I got stuck on these little points that to me were massive, and then I realised actually they're not as big as what I thought they were. I need to focus on what we share in common and stand on that, and that's what we walked forward in. I didn't tell Michelle I was sharing that story. We've talked about it before. So that's the ideal scenarios for communication. And then what happens is when it doesn't go so well, quite often the communication leads to raised voices sometimes, or it leads to passive manipulative sort of behaviour. And then next thing you know, you're in conflict. Something we joke about in our marriage, and Michelle's happy with me saying this, is that Michelle taught me how to yell. You know, she came from a household that communicated more verbally than my family did. We were a lot quieter, and I didn't see a lot of argumenting in my parents, and so it wasn't something that was so common to me. And so sometimes, sometimes I'm glad we live rurally, because sometimes I lift my voice. And what happens is our perspective. So here are some red flags, right, to do with conflict and to do with communication. Our perspective is right, no one can change that. When we get to that thinking on a topic, we're in dangerous ground. That's a red flag. When we start making statements and claims in a conversation, that's a huge red flag. And I think we often make statements or claims to protect something, because we're feeling vulnerable, or we don't want to lose something. Another point of conflict is we put our stake in the ground on a certain issue, and again, remember, I'm talking about unhealthy conflict here, because some of these, this can be a healthy thing in some regards, if you're talking about in terms of morals, but in some situations, we put our stake in the ground and we will not move it. And I think for some of us, it's like we get a 600mm auger on a 7.5 tonne digger, and we drill the hole down 4 metres deep, and we put a 300mm SED post in there. We pump 25 MPa concrete at a slump of about 80, so it's completely solid, and it's going to stick that post in there with a 5% hardener in the concrete and steel reinforcing, and we put it all down there. We wait 28 days for it to set, and we are not moving. I'm serious. We get like that. We will not move. It is a red flag. So in conflict, when our communication fails, we often go to one or two places of our brokenness that comes out of it. And it's this: we go to an aggressive fight mode, or we go to a passive manipulative mode. And I spoke to Moses about this. Our 5-year-old, we see this in him, because he's trying to figure out his standing in the world and where he fits in terms of how much authority he has in situations and his place in the adulthood of life. And so when you ask him to do something, if he disagrees, he just goes straight to aggressive mode. I'm not going to do that if you don't do this for me. That's what he says. I'm not going to set the table if you don't let me watch more TV. He says it. Or what's another one? He says, I don't love you. I'm not going to love you if you don't let me watch TV. Passive manipulative statements. And it is, and we carry these things into our adulthood, right? And we put a far more complicated array of justification around it, but we sometimes do the same thing when we're older, because we are protecting something, or we are afraid of the vulnerability to do with a topic, because we are struggling to listen. So when we looked at this as the weekend to remember, I always call it a weekend to remember. The Set Your Church free weekend we did, a weekend to remember is a marriage course by Family Life, but I always get them mixed up. So the Set Your Church free weekend that we did, we got a core group of people, like Rachel said earlier, and we looked at what are some areas in the life of our church, over the history of our church, that maybe we need to grow in, and we called them corporate sins. And that's a massive word. Like, when you hear that, if you're anything like me, you're like, oh, that sounds really bad, And really all it's doing is saying these are some areas where we haven't done well in, and we have allowed sin to be a part of the way we have done things here at church. And so then one of the themes that came up was conflict. And so then I had to ask myself, well, how is conflict a sin? And this is what I was thinking. When we say a statement like, I am right and you are wrong, there's judgment in that. Or there can be judgment, and judgment is a sin. When we use the you never statements, it's like that can be a form of passive aggression, right? That can be a way of implying false guilt on someone to make them feel guilty for something. Why won't you change statements? They can be like self-idolatry and puffing ourselves up as being the one that's right. The other person has to change. That's a sin. I don't need two statements. I don't need to do that. Self-righteousness. When we lose sight of another person's best interests, it can be justification for why we want to do something and forgetting to love the other person for what it is that they are needing in that area of conflict. Growing ill feelings towards somebody, that often happens when communication breaks down. I know many situations where communication breaks down, it goes into conflict, and then when the communication breaks down, right, in families and work and church, then there's less communication, and next thing you know, you can have a situation that's never been resolved because there's now a great big chasm of time between the event and now, and all because the communication wasn't maintained, right? So it's so important, because then relationships break down. Hate and unforgiveness can become part of it. Grumbling and arguing, being bad-tempered, having malice. These are all sins. They're out of our own brokenness. They're places where our motive to come into conflict can come out to play. So then we get to a really practical teaching, which is Matthew chapter 18, because we need that. And it says this: dealing with sin in the church. My translation just says sin. Some will say, yes, the sin towards another person. If your brother or sister sins, or sins against you, I think is what some say, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. This is what I've been asked to talk on. Well, let's get into some steps of how to deal with conflict and how to deal with sin, whether it's an act of sin specifically in the life of an individual or if it's an act of sin towards somebody else in the life of the church. So here is the Zaneified versions that I've come up with. What I've said is that if someone has sinned against you, if someone has wronged you, go to that person and tell them the issue. And there's like a hasteness to this. It's like, don't wait around. Go to the person and speak to them. I've got this wrong myself in the past. You know, we get this wrong. I've been in situations where I have seen people almost literally trying to form support groups of people to support their, justify their position on something before talking to the individual. No, that's naughty. Like that's bad. That's bad. That is unhealthy in the body of Christ. We need to go to the person, and this takes courage. We have to step into a place of courage to do that. But it's so important that you go and talk to that individual. Don't go and talk to others. Go and talk to that individual first. And the hope is that the issue would be resolved so that you can come back and worship God. But sometimes it doesn't work quite like that. And so we're given another practical step in Matthew. And it says, take 1 or 2 people with you. And my version is so that a healthy 2-sided conversation can be had around the issue. Now, the difficulty of 2 people is that in a process of communication, when there's breakdown or strong opinions, often it might not go so well, right? So the idea of bringing a couple of people with you aren't people that are on your side to validate your own perspective. They're people to go and help you resolve the issue in a harmonious way. Now, when you're hunting, if you are hunting for a stag, all right, theoretically speaking, and it's out in a paddock and it's on its own, you're far more likely to get in close to take a shot at that stag on its own than if there are 12 hinds around the stag. Now, why is that? It's because there's 12 extra sets of eyes looking out to the landscape, right, to be aware of what is going on. And so it's harder to get in because any one of those hinds could see you and make known to the stag that you're there, and then they'll all take off, right? And this is like the perspective here. It's like 6 sets of eyes see better than 1 set. There's wisdom in a group of people to help sort out a situation. If that works and resolution is had, go and worship God. If not, we get to the 3rd step. Now, the Bible here talks about bring it to the church, and it's not, celebration time on Sunday, come up and drag the person up here and tell the church about the issue that you're having. It's not talking about that. It's talking about if we go to 1 Corinthians 6 and there's a couple of other places in the Bible Paul talks about it. He's talking about people in the church that have wisdom. And Paul talks about it in a situation in 1 Corinthians where he's talking about sorting out issues among the church. Why are you going to the courts to do that when there's people in the church that have wisdom and you can sort that out within the church? And so that's basically saying that my version of that is bring the issue to those deemed as having governance and wisdom in the church for a resolution. And I would say that is effectively our team, our leadership team that we have here at church, is a group of people that can be in that role. And there are also a lot of you here that have wisdom and understanding and life experience in different areas of life that could be really healthily brought into a team to sort situations out as well. But that's kind of where we get to with if there hasn't been resolution, the next step is we take it to the team, the leadership team, to find resolution. And then we get to the one that no one likes talking about, is that if still there's no resolution and the person remains unrepentant and with a heart that is not in line with the church's unity, then they are to be removed from the church. Silence. Now, we don't want to do that, right, ultimately, because why? Because we are the disciples of Jesus, and we are known as the disciples of Jesus because of our love that we demonstrate. And this whole process is bathed in love. It's not so that we can, like some churches would call, excommunicate people, right? But it is effectively saying if there is an issue that is unresolved and has gone through a healthy biblical process, then it is important sometimes that the person be resolved. And why is that? It's because we are the reflection of Christ's body. There's a passage in the Bible that talks about a little bit of yeast spoils a whole batch, right? Your bread won't rise if there's a bit of yeast that's no good. And the bigger picture of all of this is that it's the way we are represented to the community of who we are as the church. Everyone take a breath. So we're having meetings on... No, we're not. Okay, just wanted to break that a little bit. So what we need to remember is following this passage is a very, very important thing. And it says this: truly I tell you, this is straight after it says treat them like a pagan or a tax collector. Jesus says, truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them. Unity. This passage is all about unity and about being a people that go together of one mind and one heart and one purpose. And this is the issue with the sin of conflict, is that when that is something that is allowed to fester in a group of people, disunity happens. And the evil one's tactic in the church, one of his huge tactics, is to bring disunity in the church. Why? Because we become less effective. because we have quarrelling, because we have disagreements, because we have unresolved issues. We need to be unified. Colossians 3 onwards. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. And forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against somebody. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all of these virtues, put on love. We start with love, we finish with love. Which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell in your hearts, among you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. My hope for us is that we can be so well unified in our mission together as a group of people, acting out of love for one another's best interests, right? That we can be a powerful witness to our community and to in our families, in our home, and at church to one another because of the unity we have together. What do I hear when we look back on events that have gone so well at the church, like the pumpkin party, right? Oh, we loved the pumpkin party. Everyone working together for a common purpose and common good. When we work together in the life of the church, not just for the pumpkin party, but as a group of individuals, we are known for achieving great things together. So the team's going to come up, the worship team, and I've asked them to sing another old song, which is Change My Heart, O Lord. And in the space of the song, we cannot be responsible for changing other people, right? You cannot. We are only responsible for changing ourselves. And so as the song is sung, my what I put to you is to reflect on what God may be calling to you to be submitting before him in the area of conflict, in the area of maybe the process that you have handled conflict in the past, or in the way that maybe a difficult communication piece that you're involved in at the moment. And I want you to reflect and allow God's Spirit maybe to convict, to lovingly encourage, to be with you in the areas that he brings to your mind and heart. And then after the song, I'm going to come up and we're just going to say a prayer all together out of that space for us moving forward. Is that all goods? Cool. Okay.